Everybody, welcome to the Glutenology Masterclass, live Q&A number 2. I hope you've enjoyed the sessions. As a matter of fact, if you have enjoyed the sessions, I'd appreciate just chiming in what you liked, what you wish we could have added. Any of your feedback is fantastic for my team as we create version 2.0. We're always looking to make updates as research comes out. So if you've got some feedback for us, we love to hear that feedback. We're going to take some time tonight, though, to answer your questions specifically about gluten, the gluten-free diet, and anything I talked about during the master class. So if you've got questions, you want to make sure you go ahead and pump those into the Q&A box, either to the side or below this video, so that I can do my best to get as many answered as possible. I think we've got several hundred questions that have already come in, so I'm going to do my best to answer as many as I can in the time frame that we have allotted for this evening. So thanks for joining me, and thanks for tuning in to Glutenology, the ultimate masterclass on going gluten-free. So let's just start and dive in. So Mary's asking, as many others have posted, I'd be interested in knowing what difference, if any, sprouting grains will make. So I've answered this in different ways, but sprouting grains makes absolutely no difference in terms of gluten content. As a matter of fact, sprouting some grains increases the quantity of gluten that's found. So sprouting doesn't make it better. Now, from a digestive perspective, if you follow like Weston Price and the Price Pottinger Foundation for proper preparation of foods to make them easily digestible, sprouting is helpful in that regard. But if you are gluten sensitive, meaning if you're verified gluten sensitive, you've done genetic testing, and you know you should avoid gluten, you should not use sprouted grains at all, even though they have a healthier connotation out there. So hopefully that clarifies that for you. Scroll back up just a little bit. I think there was a part 2 to that. Okay, so also what thickeners would be acceptable. So gellan gum is acceptable, guar gum is acceptable, tapioca starch is acceptable, arrowroot starch is acceptable, coconut flour, almond flour. We have an entire article. As a matter of fact, probably be better, Mary, if you would go to glutenfreesociety.org and type in grain-free flours, and you'll pull up one pretty long, in-depth article on the different options that you have. But also type in toxic gums. You'll pull up another article all about the different gums. It's a big question to answer in this short period of time, but I want you to have a viable resource you can go back and check out. And that goes for any of you. If you haven't already, go over to Gluten Free Society, sometime after tonight's show, and sign up for our newsletter there. And understand, we've got thousands of videos and articles there for you to peruse for free at no charge. Just use our search engine to find what you're looking for, because there's tons of valuable information there, but we'll also send you a lot of free information on gluten as well when you sign up for that newsletter. Let's see here. I've been gluten-free for about 3 weeks, and the cravings are horrendous. I'm having a hard time feeling satisfied, even though I'm eating large portions of veggies and meat. Any tips to help me through this stage? Already supplementing with vitamin D3, niacin, and vitamin C. So those are great starts, actually, Angela. Niacin's great for cravings, but you got to make sure you get it high enough. Otherwise, it's not going to be super effective. Most people that take niacin, anywhere from 50 to 100 milligrams, you can take upwards of 500 milligrams of niacin, and even higher than that, upwards of 1,000 if cravings are really bad. You just have to watch out for that nasty flush that niacin can deliver. The flushing of the skin can be very uncomfortable and make you look strange, make you look like you're breaking out in hives, so don't do it in public. Vitamin C, same thing. You got to get the dose up. You need to be around 5 to 10 grams a day if it's going to be effective in that regard. Some people also have severe cravings because they have an underlying yeast or candida overgrowth. So one of the other things that you might consider is something called caprylic acid. We have a product called ultra caprylic acid that contains pure caprylic acid that might be helpful. And also we have another supplemental with a number of different herbs in it called Yeast Shield, and you might check that out because that also can be very helpful when those cravings are being caused by a yeast overgrowth. Remember, a lot of times, folks, when you go grain-free, if you've got underlying yeast, they will hijack your brain and make you crave everything, make you feel completely non-satiated when you're eating your meals. So those are options in addition to what you're already doing. Sierra, can I shed some light on the subject of fasting in autophagy to reverse autoimmune disease such as RA? So, fasting it's a great question. So fasting, depending on how long you're doing it, accelerates autophagy, which is basically, it's programmed cellular death so that your body can replace the old damaged and worn out cells with new cells. So if you want to expedite that and do that faster, fasting can be very beneficial in that regard. My experience with fasting, though, most people, it's easy to fast. Like, it's very easy to fast. And you can do intermittent fasting, you can do 24-hour, you can do 3-day fasting. I'd say if you go beyond 3 days, probably work with somebody, especially if you're diabetic. You shouldn't be going at fasting alone because of the blood sugar fluctuation problems. Or if you're on blood sugar lowering medications, you got to be real cautious and careful with that. But if you're not, fasting's a powerful tool, but you can't do fasting if you don't do diet change. And that's the mistake I see a lot of people make, is they attempt fasting, but they keep eating the standard American diet. And so they feel good when they fast and they feel horrible when they try to bring food back in. So that's probably the best advice I can give you. Again, short answers. Kathy's asking, in celiac disease, if you have deficiency such as iron or B12, does supplementation actually help if malabsorption is due to damage of the proximal intestine? Is that the only place in the gut where these nutrients can be absorbed? No, great question. So, can you still supplement with B12 and iron and other nutrients if that area of the intestine is damaged where those nutrients are absorbed? The answer is yes, you can. And let me give you a perfect example with B12. We actually use something called methylcobalamin, which is a type of B12, but we use it in a sublingual form. So you actually put it in the mouth, it's a lozenge, and you let it melt, because what it does is it absorbs through the cheeks. It bypasses the stomach, it bypasses the damage in the intestine, so you can still absorb it buccally and through the buccal mucosa. And so that's one avenue that you have with B12. So, a product that we have is called methylcobalamin, you might find very helpful. We also, for those of you sensitive to methylcobalamin, we have some hydroxycobalamin lozenges as well, that can be used to absorb through the cheeks. And look, even if you were using an oral pill that wasn't sublingual, you can still take high enough doses to induce absorption through the intestinal lining through what's known as passive diffusion. So for those of you who don't know what passive diffusion is, it's a kind of a biology law, so to speak, where a substance will travel from an area of greater concentration down the gradient to the area of least concentration. So if you concentrate the lumen of your intestine with vitamin B12, it will passively diffuse into your bloodstream even if your gut is damaged. So even if you suffer from celiac damage and malabsorption, you can still, if you get your doses right, you can still get iron and B12 absorbed. Now, there's a little bit of an uphill battle with that. And, I would encourage any of you, if you haven't already watched it, I don't know if the modules are still available yet, but if you have, time, make sure you watch Module 7. I was surprised, really, when the voting came in and everybody voted for their favorite modules. Module 7 was not included in that. And I think we're going to have to re-change the name of that module, because I think a lot of people skipped that module because they didn't realize how important recovery is with nutrition. So Module 7 is all about nutritional recovery. How do you, what vitamins, what minerals, what nutrients, what should you be concerned with? What about the pre-existing damage in the gut? That's what the module is all about. And I know a lot of people skipped that one because it didn't come back as a favorite. And it was actually my personal favorite. And there's more learning in that module probably than any other module you could watch out of the class. Rosalind, hello doctor. I listened to the Glutenology Masterclass. Thank you for the encouraging, mind-blowing information. Wow, thanks for that. That's a great comment. Question though, can sinus infection cause an ear block, head pain, and chest tightness? Can an inner ear infection and can it also cause an inner ear infection and ongoing problems? Yes, it can. And so, one of the best things that you can do, aside from just supporting your immune system's ability to fight infection better, best thing for that is zinc, vitamin C, and NAC. Especially if it's a sinus infection, NAC is super effective for supporting something like that. I hope I answered your question, because the wording, I think you made English maybe your second language, so the wording was a little different than. So I tried to extrapolate your question. Let's see here. Carol says, I was diagnosed with lymphocytic gastritis 8 months ago. I have had IBS for decades and eat a gluten-free whole food diet. I had an endoscopy and a biopsy with 5 samples. The biopsy and breath test for H. pylori are both negative. My celiac blood testing was negative. Also, hydrogen breath test was negative. My anti-gliadin antibodies are both lower than the normal range according to the lab, but no flag. My GI healthcare provider is at a loss. Could you please touch on the subject, this condition, and in some way is it related to non-celiac gluten sensitivity as well as celiac disease? Yes. Absolutely. So if you haven't done genetic testing, so this is what I talked about in modules 2 and 3 is the problem with traditional testing is it focuses on antibodies. And if you didn't pre-qualify your antibodies first, even though that your antibody levels were normal, you can get false negatives on antibody tests. But the antibody testing is also only accurate for certain aspects of disease. It's really only accurate for celiac disease, and that's late stage celiac disease. It's not very accurate for the other forms of gluten that we might find, like the corn gluten or the oat or the rice or the other grains like millet. The gluten's found in those different grains, all critical. So if you have been gluten-free in a traditional sense for a long time and you're still coming back with lymphocytic infiltration, that would be where you need to look at. You can change your diet, and that doesn't cost you anything for doing genetic testing, but you could also do genetic testing if you want to confirm with a great degree of certainty that diet change more aggressively is right for you. The other thing you have to understand is certain medicines can cause that. Pesticides can cause that. So even if you're eating a whole food diet, if you're not eating organic and you're getting in pesticides through your diet, that can also contribute to that problem as well. Let's see here. Can diet and supplements help with leg lymphedema? It can. I've seen leg lymphedema improve dramatically, and especially with gluten-free diets. I've actually seen some people with severe lymphedema in the legs do very, very well with a combination of diet change and lymphatic massage. So that's something I would definitely encourage you to explore. Let's see, Stive. Some plastic false teeth sets have gluten. How can one know? You have to get what's called a material data sheet from the manufacturer. And this is like if your dentist is recommending certain types of dentures to you, you ask the dentist to get with whoever that company is that produces that for them, and you get what's called a material data sheet. The material data sheet will have all the fillers, all the ingredients, so that you can rule in or out any chemicals or potential for gluten. And that goes for any of the adhesives, the bonding agents, or anything else that the dentist is using as well. You can get a material data sheet on that information before you allow it to be a permanent fixture in your mouth and potentially contaminate you. There's actually a really great write-up a number of years ago in an orthodontic journal where the braces, the adhesive in the braces, a child that had celiac disease was going into flare because of the braces. So that's something that you definitely want to be aware of. Let's see. So Anne's asking do you feel like once I fully implement the grain-free diet, that I'll be able to finally have a pathway to get off my antidepressants and have a normalized brain without severe depression? Yes, I truly believe that, Anne, and I've seen that time and time again, where people, even people that have come to see me, we change their diet, we change their life, we change the outlook of what medicines are necessary, even if that wasn't our initial intention. I get people all the time come to see me for chronic autoimmune pain, and they're also on an antidepressant, and by the time they get 6 months into the diet, they find they no longer need the antidepressant because they're no longer depressed, and they're able to wean off of those things. So I definitely feel like it's a strong possibility that diet change has the power to change, your mental outlook and your mental chemistry. Again, we see that too. We know gluten is a neurotoxin, and there are a number of research studies linking depression directly to gluten exposure. So definitely, I think it's a possibility if you're gluten sensitive. So again, the caveat there, remember, is always this: gluten can cause a lot of diseases because it causes inflammation, and at its core, inflammation is a precursor to many diseases. That doesn't mean that gluten is the cause for everyone's depression. So again, I go back to, if you're gluten sensitive, changing your diet can have a profound impact. So keep that in mind. I think I answered that as well already, Mark. So sprouted grains like Ezekiel breads, yes, they have gluten in them. They're not gluten-free. They're healthier than non-sprouted breads, but if you're gluten sensitive, they're not healthy for you. So don't try to force it. It's a mistake a lot of people make, is they think, Well, I'm going to use the Ezekiel instead because it's healthier. Somehow the gluten in that won't damage or hurt me. And their assumption there is absolutely false and actually quite damaging. So keep that in mind. Sprouted grains, Ezekiel grain, all that, ancient grains. If you're gluten sensitive, you're gluten sensitive, and 20 parts per million is going to do damage to you. So it doesn't matter that it has lower amounts of gluten, and that includes, because I think we've got some questions in the feed on sourdough. Look, sourdough bread still has gluten in it. If you are gluten sensitive, you can't eat sourdough bread unless you're willing to compromise your health, and that's going back to it's all or none, really, in my opinion. You've got to get diligent with your diet. You can't allow these, even though they may be smaller gluten exposures, you can't allow them to inundate your lifestyle, and you can't allow them to inundate your headspace, because what happens is people think, okay, well, I'm going to use the Ezekiels or the sprouted or the sourdough as a substitute, and I'm going to be doing something better, but it's still bad, right? And what you're doing is just basically you're selecting a less dangerous poison, but in my opinion, it's more dangerous because you're allowing it in more frequently and more consistently over time, and so it's an insidious poison. Let's see. So Linda's chiming in saying, okay, Linda says, I'm reading your book and listening to the Glutenology class. Her question is about travel. I've had trouble when traveling, finding good food in rural grocery stores and when I'm with family who generously want to serve guests but don't listen to my food needs. Yeah, I get that. Understand you totally. So kind of the way around that is I always travel with a food suitcase or a food backpack. Actually, my backpack has, for me, it has lots of nuts. It has different types of jerky and dried fruit in it, just so that if I do travel, I've got food and I won't go hungry no matter where I'm at. Whether it's rural or whether it's, whether I can, find a local organic fare, I'm always covered. The other thing is the family members, they're going to, they want to serve you. That food is love, right? And your family wants to make you the thing that might kill you if they don't understand gluten sensitivity the way that you do. So they're not trying to harm you on purpose. They just don't get it, right? And this is where you have to be a gluten-free warrior. And this is, warrior advocate for yourself. And that doesn't mean you have to be rude or mean or condescending to some people that are just trying to feed you or kill you with the food, right? Because their intention is good. Their intention is love. So you have to have a meaningful conversation before you show up. You can't go to a relative's house and, they're trying to prepare all these things, and you get there and they did all that work, and then you feel bad because they did all that work and you've got yourself now in a compromising position. You've got to call them before you show up. Generally what I do is I call the week before or sooner, just depending on how much prep work I think they may try to do for me, and just tell them, look, if you do prep work and you try to make food that's gluten-free, I'm not going to eat it, so please don't do it. That's just the conversation I have, because most people that when I'm visiting don't have any fathom, don't have any idea of what it really means to be gluten-free and healthy, and I don't want to put the weight of that burden on their shoulders. So I give them carte blanche to not worry about my food needs, that I'll take care of my own. That's the way I handle it, and that's the way I would encourage a lot of you to handle it, because family, unless they're going through it, unless they struggle with autoimmune disease, unless they've changed their diet, they're not going to be able to empathize with you because they just won't get it. Let's see, Beautisse. The masterclass was awesome and very informative. I can't wait to share it with everyone. Awesome. Share it. Hashtag save 100 million lives when you do. So since let's see, where's the question in that? So that's more of a question for the customer service team, Beautisse. I would, because you're asking it, I want to give you a method to answer it. Contact glutenology@gmail.com and ask that question about the package that you have, because I don't want to tell you wrong. And then part two of your question, why do I sometimes have a heaviness in my chest that makes it difficult to breathe and make me feel bad when I'm overheated? And then do chickpeas and nutmeg cause pain also in the stomach? They can if you're allergic to them. And this goes back to many people with gluten sensitivity are allergic to other things. And so sometimes it can be important to measure and test for that if you're still struggling, even though you're following along with the diet. As far as the heaviness, when you're overheated, there are a lot of reasons why that can happen. Neurological are some of the bigger reasons. You may have a sympathetic dominance. So when you get overheated, your sympathetic nervous system kind of shorts out, makes you short of breath. That's very common. So I would look into that. When people are sympathetic dominant, there are a lot of reasons why that can be. In my experience, generally, it's years of too much running and gunning, too much stress, too much of the wrong poisons, too much of the wrong foods, not enough sunshine, exercise, bad air quality, bad water quality. So look at all those fundamentals first. Go back and review the 7 highly effective habits of the gluten-free warrior, and make sure you're doing those things and really dialing those things in. And if you're still struggling, then you want to get with a functional practitioner and make sure that you have more hand-holding, because there could be something deeper going on there. Let's see, Sandra, thanks for the informative masterclass. Is the ancient grain einkorn okay to eat? I think I answered that one already. We said no, okay. It still has gluten in it. It doesn't matter that it might be easier to digest than your more hybridized grains of today's world, but it still has gluten, and that's why you want to avoid it if you're gluten sensitive. Linda's asking, can you tell us specifically how to get lymphocyte proliferation nutritional deficiency testing done? Hang tight, Linda, because we're actually, we do it in our clinic. So one way to do it is that you go visit a doctor who understands nutrition. If you go in and the doctor doesn't know what that means, they don't understand nutrition, so that's not the right doctor for you. So that's one way to get it done. Use it as a litmus test to find the right doctor. But we're working on a method where we're able to actually get this test directly into the hands of people without a doctor's visit, just like we did with gluten sensitivity testing. Be patient. My team is working on that as we speak. I'm hoping to have a solution by January. So if you're patient, we'll make a big announcement when that happens. And if you guys are interested in that big announcement, you got to make sure you sign up for our newsletter, because like I've been telling you for the last few weeks, censorship is getting heavier and heavier, and the best way to prevent censorship is to sign up for our newsletter, because my newsletter can't be censored. I can get that directly to your inbox, but YouTube and Facebook and some of these other mediums have been heavily censoring a lot of our content lately. Anne's asking, for those who picked up or purchased gluten sensitivity genetic test kit, I host a future session which explains the significance of combinations of various readings. We actually have a webinar follow-up with that, and so you can reach out again to Glutenology at Gmail, and they can make sure that you have access to that webinar follow-up. So there's a question on, does Gluten-Free Society share DNA material of their customers with other gene research organizations? No, we absolutely do not. When you do genetic testing through us, we're not like these other big 23andMe companies that shared all your data with pharma. We don't share data with anyone. We share data only with you. We have no interest in collecting this data for sharing to build and make better pharmaceuticals. Our simply the only thing that we do with this data once we collect it is we collect the numbers on the data, but we do not save names. We don't archive your information or sell it to other people. It's just not something that I'm about. We believe in protecting you, and this is another reason why we don't do any kind of insurance or go through any kind of insurance, because most of you want confidentiality and your testing. So hopefully that answered your question. Let's see, Carlene, I have gluten in my dental retainers and am going to replace them via a different company which has no gluten. The only no food I eat is quinoa. As I switch out my diet, am I going to have the enzymes to eat new foods? Also, can you recommend a good cookbook that has more recipes? No fancy recipes, just simple things. Yeah, so go to Gluten-Free Society. We've got 140 recipes there that you have access to. Just click the recipe tab at the top. And you'll have tons of recipes. There are lots of really great ideas. There's also 31 recipes in the book, No Grain, No Pain, if you have a copy of that. And if you don't, you can check it out at the library or purchase it online at a major book carrier. As far as having enough digestive enzymes, I don't know if you're going to have enough digestive enzymes. It's hard for me to answer that definitively because I haven't measured your enzyme levels. Some people with gluten sensitivity and gluten damage have poor digestive enzyme production. And yes, we support them with digestive enzyme supplementation. One of the products I use is Gluten Shield, especially in that first 6 months or so when they're navigating, trying to figure out how to go gluten-free, because they're making mistakes, right? So we give, part of the enzyme is there to protect them from gluten cross-contamination. The other bulk of the enzymes in that product are designed to help support healthy digestion. So what does HLA-DQ1 and DQ3 genetic testing tell you if it's positive? It tells you that you have non-celiac gluten sensitivity. In a nutshell, that's what it tells you. Does the genetic testing differentiate between true gluten sensitivity versus cross-reactive foods? So cross-reactive foods is a whole nother ballgame. Genetic testing tells you that you have true gluten sensitivity or not. Because it's genetic. You can't change your genes. You can only change the expression of your genes by altering your environment. And so you want to know genetically whether or not you have gluten-sensitive genes so that you know how to commit to the diet or not. As far as cross-reactivity, there isn't a genetic test for cross-reactivity. There are antibody tests and other sensitivity tests that help us understand whether or not you're reacting to other foods, but there is no test specifically for cross-reactivity. There are foods that have what are known as homology with gluten, which I talked about in the gluten mimicry module 8. Certain foods have similar protein structures as the protein structure of gluten, and that's where mimicry comes from, or cross-reactivity comes from. But other than that, you're just allergic to other things, or you're just sensitive to other things. Let's see here. I have multiple HLAs that are gluten problems. I also have a problem with corn, pumpkin, and a few others. These all have lectins. Which HLA causes that sensitivity? There isn't an HLA that's been identified that we could say if you have this pattern that you are lectin sensitive. You have to understand too, lectins are in most all foods. So some people, certain lectins bother them more than others because of their digestive tracts being compromised. In my experience, if your digestive tract is compromised, especially from years of gluten exposure, you have a greater propensity to react to lectins, not because you're actually reactive to them, but because your digestion is compromised and your immune system is compromised. So I would like more information on vegetables that contain gluten, if any, also fruits. They don't, Veronica. I think there may be some confusion, or maybe I'm misunderstanding the way you're asking your question, but vegetables don't contain gluten unless they're cross-contaminated or prepared with gluten grains, and neither do fruits. They don't contain any gluten. Could you discuss how food combinations affect digestion? Yeah, we could talk a little bit about that. So if you're combining foods, there's some truth to this, although I haven't seen it in clinic. I haven't seen it play out with everybody at 100%, but this is generally true of people who have compromised GI tracts. It's harder to digest food when you combine heavy meat with heavy sugars or heavy carbohydrates. And I'm talking about more of your simple carbohydrates. So for example, fruit and meats don't mix well, don't play nice together in your digestive tract when your digestive tract is compromised. So that's probably one of the biggest and most relevant issues I see as it relates to food combining. Can I eat legumes instead of grains? You can, if your digestive tract can handle it. And that's one of the things, when I talk about this, I talked about it in the masterclass, I also talked about it in No Grain, No Pain, is that part of the phase 2 No Grain, No Pain diet is legume free, because what we're trying to do is give your gut rest. We're trying to give it full rest so that it can heal, repair, and recover from the damage, so that you can, at some point in your future, reintroduce things like legumes. But for most that I see with years of gluten-induced damage, legumes, at least initially for the first several months, can be problematic and cause digestive distress. I follow No Grain, No Pain since 2017. How do I get rid of hemorrhoids? So there may be something else going on, Dahlia, in your health that your hemorrhoids are not necessarily what you're eating, but they could be more about what you're not eating, or a lack of nutrition. So like some hemorrhoids, you need certain nutrients to heal and repair those. Same thing with ulcerative colitis. You can have that active condition, and it may not be food per se. It may be bacterial imbalance. It may be that you have nutritional deficits. Go back and review the module where I talk about going beyond gluten and autoimmune disease, because there may be some things that you're not doing that you're missing from those modules. And some of that might be testing to get you better definitive answers unique to yourself. Do I feel, Anne's asking, do you feel that once I fully implement grain-free, I'll be able to finally, I think I answered that question already. Answered that one already. The effects of millet, quinoa, buckwheat, and grasses on celiacs. It's not good, Filene. In my experience, celiacs that continue to try to eat millet, quinoa, buckwheat, or any other grasses for that matter, don't do well with them. They have persistent inflammation, and we've seen this for 20 plus years. We've seen this in the clinic over and over and over again. If they don't, that's why I wrote No Grain, No Pain and founded Gluten-Free Society, because so many people were going gluten-free. They were going wheat, barley, rye-free. But when we would measure the inflammation, it wouldn't go away. Their autoimmune condition would improve symptomatically, but it wouldn't go away. They'd hit a plateau, and then they'd whiplash back into symptoms again until we actually changed fully the diet. So that is in a nutshell really why I think you should be avoiding those things if you're a celiac. Andrea, can you explain what gluten is? Well, that I answered. I spent 2 hours answering that in modules 1 and 2, so I'm not going to answer that here because it's a 2-hour answer. But why does it make you feel so tired? Predominantly, one of the biggest reasons gluten makes people feel tired is it's a poison. If you're gluten sensitive, if you eat poison, you're going to get tired. Whether it's gluten or any other poison, one of the things that poisons do is it damages your mitochondria, damages your cells, damages your tissues, and makes your body have to work harder. And that extra energy that you're going in to neutralize that poison is stolen from the energy that would be used to give you actual physical and mental and brain power energy. So it's again, think of it as a poison. So Susan asked, Dr. Osborne, please confirm there are only 4 genes associated with gluten sensitivity. There are 4 alleles. So to be clear, there's 2 genes, but each gene contains 2 alleles. So there's up to 4 alleles that a person can have, with celiac or non-celiac gluten sensitivity, that you could have. So there's up to 4, from 1 all the way up to 4. But there's 2 genes that we measure when we're doing genetic testing. And remember, each gene contains 2 alleles. So when you're talking about 4, it's not 4 genes. It's 2 genes with 4 alleles. Dr. Osborne, I'm grain-free but still suffering with nasal congestion, sneezing, itchy skin. Is there more to the story? Yeah, there's more to the story for sure, Susan. That's a common pattern that I see when people are in mold. So mold illness is very real and very dangerous. One of the things I might encourage you to do, Susan, is get with a doctor who's an expert and get tested. Because if you're in mold, there are tests that can help you identify, and non-esoteric tests, I should say, because the mold industry is a lot like the gluten industry. A lot of the testing that a lot of what so-called mold experts do are not really mold tests. They're kind of roundabout tests that measure inflammation, but the inflammation is not really specific as to whether or not you have a mold issue. But there are actual mold tests that need to be done to help confirm that, because if your environment, if your home or your workplace is poisoning you slowly with mold, that's something that you don't want to take lightly and you want to take fast action on. Can I have celiac and not have the gene, or am I gluten sensitive and need to treat myself as a celiac? So I've never seen in 21 years a case where a celiac didn't have the gene or genes. So is it possible? I don't know, but I've never seen it. And in the literature, you should know that 99.8% of all celiacs have those gene patterns. So it's very unlikely that if you're celiac that you won't have the gene. I would question whether or not you've had all the genes tested properly, because most celiacs, the genes they've had tested are only the HLA-DQ2 and the HLA-DQ8 patterns, but they don't have the other patterns tested. Sophia, I wake up at night. What could it be? Lots of things, Sophia. Go back and watch. I've got some episodes on sleep, and if you haven't seen those in our archive, go subscribe at Gluten-Free Society, and then you'll have access to search through our archives and look at some of I've done several hours on sleep, so it's too big a question to ask in that way. Let's see here. I desperately need your advice. After going on a gluten-free, low-carb, no-dairy diet, I lost 100 pounds after I developed severe stomach issues and pelvic organ prolapse, pretty severe prolapse. Where's the question in that? Did I miss it? Oh, so you did, okay, go back. So you did develop severe issues in pelvic organ prolapse, a pretty severe prolapse. So there's a lot of reasons why. I mean, you lost 100 pounds. So probably I would imagine, Teresa, without knowing you or knowing your history, that you probably had some pretty severe muscle wasting, and that includes muscle wasting around the pelvic floor. And when you lost all that weight, it created a shift internally that allowed for that prolapse to occur. I would really encourage you to get with a pelvic floor expert, a physical therapist who specializes in pelvic floor exercise specifically, to see if that can be rehabbed. It may have to be surgically corrected, it may not be. But if you've also developed stomach issues, there could be, again, some diaphragmatic issues, there could be some atrophy that's there. There could be other food allergies that you're struggling with. There could be, depending on the time frame where you lost your weight, I've seen cases where people had a lot of weight loss, and because of their weight loss, as you're losing fat, remember what stores toxic burden for your body? Fat cells do. So as you're losing a lot of weight, a lot of that toxic burden is coming out of you, and it's hammering your kidneys, and it's hammering your liver. And it's being recirculated into your body through your enterohepatic circulation through bile, so it can get into your GI tract again and cause symptoms there. So some people have, I call it angry fat, is as you're losing all that weight, those toxins are trying to recirculate through you. So again, this may be a situation where you need to work with somebody to get more specific, because I'm just giving you generalizations here, so it's hard to say. But definitely I would follow up with somebody on the pelvic floor issue, because I see that all the time with people that going with grain problems and gluten problems, develop muscle atrophy in a severe way, and end up needing to be rehabbed post-diet change in order to really restore their health. Please address recovering from malnutrition. I did that, Michelle, in Module 7, 2 hours worth of it. That's why it was my favorite module. So go back if you haven't already, if you have the Glutenology Masterclass, and watch Module 7, because I can't answer how to recover from malnutrition in a short few minutes. Let's see. How food, I think I answered that one. Are nuts and seeds hard to digest for someone with ulcerative colitis? They can be. A lot of times with ulcerative colitis, you have to go on what's called a low residue diet, where when you chew, so if you're going to use like nuts or seeds, you use the butters more than you use the actual whole nut or seed, because as you chew it, you get little tiny chips of nuts and seeds that can lodge into the tissue that's inflamed, and it can create irritation to the inflammation. I have psoriasis that goes and comes regularly on it, but on comes back regularly, but on true gluten-free, what can be causing the repetitive recurrence? If it's actually psoriasis, one of the most common causes of recurrence is yeast overgrowth. Zinc deficiency, vitamin A deficiency can be a common cause of recurring, especially in females if it's recurring around cyclical intervals where you get flares around the cycle. Is there any way we can get the info you're saying in writing? I have cognitive issues and can't seem to catch up. Nancy, the whole master class is transcribed, and above and beyond transcription, we actually had a professional note taker do shorthand notes. So you've got, if you have the master class, you have access to those notes, but also to the transcripts where you can take your time and go through, highlight, and read. So I would encourage you to take advantage of that. Is nutritional yeast acceptable? And so I don't really recommend, if you use it here or there occasionally, but the way it's processed, I don't recommend nutritional yeast as a health food. I know it has a health food connotation, but it's just not something I recommend. I see a lot of people react poorly to it. It's actually one of the things I sometimes see people have cross-reactivity to, or molecular mimicry to, with gluten. If I have been grain-free for 2 years, will it affect my test results, my genetic test result? No. So that's the great thing about genetic testing, is if you haven't been eating gluten, you don't have to go torture yourself for 2 months eating gluten so that you can get a test done. You can just get genetic testing done. Your genes are your genes. They won't change. And so you don't have to eat gluten to have genetic testing done. I suffer from hypothyroidism as well as celiac, and my iron has been very low recently. Had iron infusion that's made feel bad in the gut. Experienced really bad constipation. Any suggestions? Yeah, figure out why your iron is dropping, because in my experience with celiac and hypothyroid, the reason your iron is not correcting, there's two big reasons. Number one, you're not following a true gluten-free diet, so you're still eating other grains that are causing perpetual damage to drop your iron and to malabsorb your iron. Number two, maybe your diet's perfect, but you have prolonged damage to the GI tract where there's some scarring, and so you have slow iron loss, especially if you're still menstruating, so you lose blood, but then your diet may not contain enough iron, or your absorption to absorb the iron from the food that you eat may not be fully 100%, and so you kind of slowly lose iron. In those types of situations, there are different strategies for that, but sometimes it's oral iron supplementation periodically, not maybe every day, but if you're planning for your cycle, you take it a week before your cycle and you take it the week of your cycle. So you cycle iron use 2 weeks out of the month to recoup the loss that you get during your period, or you implement other food sources that are very rich in iron but more gentle on the stomach. And probably the best food source for iron is going to be liver, so some type of liver. But most people, if you like liver, eat it. But if you don't, then the iron supplementation may be a better route for you. Is there gluten in chia seeds and flax seeds? No, there is not gluten in those seeds. How do I get rid of Nocturian overactive bladder? If you, generally speaking, my experience is if you have overactive bladder and you're running to the bathroom all the time and you don't have like a genetically smaller bladder, it's because you're doing something that is forcing your kidneys to filter more frequently. So your kidneys, remember, your kidneys filter your blood. They filter poison out of your blood and into your pee, into your urine. And so frequent urination and nighttime urination are oftentimes hallmark signs that you're still being exposed to certain types of toxins, be it from food or from environmental sources. So getting granular about what those might be, in my opinion, would be smart. Let's see, I answered that. Even if you're not gluten sensitive, isn't it best to avoid gluten anyway? Not necessarily. I don't think we can make that claim. Look, I'm open to scientific discovery in this realm. I mean, I think that's what science really is it's not being dogmatic in our belief that gluten is bad for everyone just because. I don't believe that that's true, because I've seen cases where it wasn't. And so just now, that being said, is gluten hard to digest? Yeah. And so I think if your gut is already struggling and maybe you're not gluten sensitive, but maybe eating that grain is hard on your digestive tract, and I think if you make that a staple food, I think you can overwhelm your gut. And so in that regard, it might not be the best thing for you to do, but I'm not going to make the claim that everybody, 100% of all people in the world, are gluten sensitive. I just can't, I don't believe that's true at all. I haven't seen the evidence not clinically nor in research to verify that, even close. Hi doc, I've had serious abdominal bloating for years. No doctor can figure it out. I have been gluten-free now for over 4.5 months and my AFib has definitely improved, but I still have that feeling of bowling balls in my belly most times. Yeah, you may be reacting to other food, Terry. You may also have digestive problems because of years of gluten exposure. So if you've just gone gluten-free, remember it takes about 6 months on a real true gluten-free diet. And again, that's if you're on a true gluten-free diet, not on a traditional gluten-free diet. And if you don't know what that means, it's because you haven't watched the whole master class or haven't read my book. So make sure you get up to speed on what I mean by that. But there could be other food sensitivities. There could be other things that you struggle with. There could be a microbial imbalance in the gut. You could have nutritional deficiencies that are preventing your gut from fully recovering or repairing itself. All those things are possibilities. So guar gum, so Mark is asking, what about guar gum and xanthan gum? So again, I mentioned the gum article earlier. I think if you guys go read that, you'll get great clarity. Answered that one. Okay, so somebody's asking about pine needle tea to help with spike protein, and I'll just throw this in. My favorite, if you're trying to nutritionally support yourself, my favorite thing to use is vitamin C and NAC, period. Vitamin C and NAC, hands down. Now, if you Want to protect yourself from the potential of a spike protein. There's now some newer research on some other natural agents that are helpful, like quercetin and bromelain, and these are studies not so much conducted in humans, but more conducted in like in vitro studies and cellular studies. But you can make an attempt at using those types of supplements. There's also a lot of great research coming out because ivermectin's not available right now, and a lot of people can't fill it, on wormwood and artemisinin as being effective. There are a couple of studies, in vitro studies, on it being very effective at killing the virus. So take that for what it's worth. How can I gain weight since I'm going gluten-free? I keep losing weight eating avocados. What else can I do? So if you're losing weight going gluten-free, know that it should stabilize provided you are eating enough calories for your body's needs. And this is a mistake a lot of people make. In the beginning, it's easy to lose weight because you're paralyzed by choice. You don't know quite what to eat because you're trying to navigate the diet, at least many people are. But as you get through that initial kind of transition, that 12-week learning curve, if you will, then the weight generally, like I said, it usually stabilizes within the first 10 weeks and then it starts coming back on. And if it's not, it may be that you're not getting adequate calories. And if it's not, and you know you're getting adequate calories, you need to work with a professional to get that weight back on. Because if calories aren't doing it, there's something else going on that could indicate malabsorption or malnutrition. It could be more serious. So Mark says, I'm 72, no health issues, have cut out all grains except organic corn. How do you eat salsa and guacamole without corn? You use other kinds of crackers. There are a couple different companies that make kind of they're not corn, but they're cassava tortilla chips. And that's an option for you if you want to really get completely grain-free and dial it in. You said you don't do IgG tests for food. Why is that not a good choice? Because IgG antibodies can be friendly, meaning just because you have circulating antibodies, for a food doesn't mean that your immune system is attacking that food. IgG antibodies can be protective, and again, it doesn't mean they're harmful or hurtful, and you have to be able to differentiate that, and that's part of what most labs don't do. They don't differentiate, so you end up with an IgG test that has like 55 different allergic reactions on it. So, your diet becomes really narrowed and really overly restrictive because of false positives on IgG testing. So hopefully that helps you understand that a little bit better. Let's see, lost that question I was in the middle of. Oh, there it is, right there. So the other question was, is common variable immune deficiency considered an autoimmune disease? Yeah, I've actually seen cases of that go in complete remission on a grain-free diet. I'm supposed to take vitamin A for a deficiency, but the only vitamin supplement I could find contains soybean oil. That's because you're looking in the wrong place. Look, I know there's a lot of supplement companies out there, and I don't want to talk bad about any of them, but I can just tell you this. I've been in this industry for 21 years. I've consulted, I've designed products, I've custom formulated, I've consulted with some of the biggest companies in the world on making their own formulations. And this industry is corrupt. There are a lot of bad products out there. There are a lot of bad ingredients in a lot of these products. It's why we have a line at Gluten-Free Society. And if you're looking for vitamin A, go over to Gluten-Free Society and type in Ultra A. I promise you our vitamin A doesn't have any of those ingredients, the beeswax, the glycerin, the other things, the soy, the genetically modified soy, and other garbage filler agents that you find in so many products. Yeah, so A-Bear is asking, he says, I'm Catholic and my questions are the prayer of Jesus Christ, our daily bread, and the Eucharist to take and eat. 2 cases where gluten-free and religion are opposing. How do we manage this? That's a great question because I'm Catholic and I don't take of the body, but I do take of the cup. So, and right now with COVID, nobody's taking of the blood because they're churches in a lot of places are still closed down and they're not sharing. So part of that is you're navigating COVID maybe a little bit too. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but part of the way I navigate the body is I actually get wafers that are they're used for this purpose. So there's a company that's out there. The name of the company, I'm trying to remember the name for you, but I believe it's called the Gluten-Free Gourmet, and the name of the owner of the company is Jennifer Cuevas. And they make a wafer that you can use. But again, the problem with the Catholic Church, in my experience, has been that they don't want to honor anything else. They don't even want to do a no gluten host. They want to do a low gluten host. And I know that that's at odds with a lot of people's spiritual background. And I don't have the best answer in the world for you. Unfortunately, I can only tell you what I do, which is I don't partake, because I've seen many of my patients going to the hospital over going to church and trying to partake in communion. So I would just be very, very cautious about that. It's just something I think God would understand. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I think God would understand that you want to honor your temple by not putting something in it that has the potential to damage you. And I know that the transformation of the host is supposed to happen, but when I see people go into the hospital over that, I draw my own conclusions medically about how that could impact their health and their life. So again, I know I didn't answer your question, but I hope that's helpful for you in navigating that spiritually. Okay, so Holly says, years ago I started scratching an itchy area on my back. It turned black because of all the scratching. There are no hives or visible rash. Is it possible that gluten is causing that? It's possible. There's a lot of things that could cause the skin to itch, the dermatitis, if you will. And as far as the placement of it being on the back, it could be something you're wearing. It could be the way that you sleep. It could be the positioning. It could be something in your fabric softeners or your detergents. I mean, there are a number of things that it could be. It could be a necklace that you're wearing in a particular area if it's hitting the back. Depending on where you scratch. There's a lot of things it could be, and gluten is one of them too, though. Is it okay to have gluten-free oat milk? There's no such thing as gluten-free oat. I can't emphasize that enough. That type of question, any of you have it in your mind right now, hopefully you're all listening. If your question is it okay to have a fill in the blank with a grain, milk, bread, or any other food item, if you're gluten sensitive, the answer is always going to be no. So remember that, because I'm getting a lot of repeat questions, and it makes me think that the message, either you didn't watch the right module or the message just didn't get through. And that's frustrating from my end, because I've said it, I know, redundantly a number of times, and I want to make sure you guys are getting educated. So if there's a way I can change the nature of how I'm trying to educate you, I want to be open to learning how to do it better. But anyway. I was wondering if it's logical for a person that has not any sensitivity to gluten stop consuming it to avoid some gluten damages. Not if you're not gluten sensitive. Is it logical? It's logical in the sense if you're avoiding grain because it's been sprayed with pesticides or genetically manipulated, it's logical to want to avoid those things. But if we're talking about, real, true, whole grains that are not adulterated, no, it's not necessarily logical if you're not truly gluten sensitive. Unless the only other logic behind that is if you find that you've been tested for gluten sensitivity accurately and your test was negative, but you feel better not eating it, then it would be logical because your body is communicating that message to you. When talking about dairy, are you talking about all forms of dairy or just dairy from the cow? All forms of dairy, but remember that cows, most of the cow dairy in most industrial countries produce a type of casein that's A1, and that casein does have gluten mimicry. But goat and sheep dairy produce an A2 casein, but many people are allergic to dairy. You've got to remember dairy, goat, sheep, doesn't matter what kind. Camel, I know a lot of that's become popular here recently. Dairy is one of the most common allergens known to man. It's in the top 8 of allergens, so you have to be real careful with dairy because aside from gluten aside, if you're allergic to dairy, you should definitely avoid it. Now, if you're gluten sensitive, my advice is to avoid all dairy for the first 6 months, before you make any attempt at reintroducing any dairy back in. I love hearing this. Thank you for sharing, John. So Dr. John says, I'm a doctor with 30 years of suffering from food allergies. Physician, heal thyself has been my only method of survival as conventional medicine has failed me. Listening to Dr. Osborne's honesty and wisdom has been a breakthrough for me, and I can honestly say, coming with a lifetime of medical experience, that what he says rings true, especially his talk on the 7 habits and being a gluten-free warrior. His clarification of lab testing is also invaluable. Thank you for these invaluable insights. Thank you, Doc, for chiming in and taking a part and just being a warrior, because what we see, as you know, in the medical community is a lack of wanting to learn. I mean, you know, the term doctor means teacher, which means student. And so as a doctor/student, who do you learn from? You learn from your patients. So many doctors are closed off to learning, and just the fact that you would have a comment like that tells me what kind of a beautiful soul you are, because we need more doctors like you to help those people that are out there that need help, that need clarity, that need people with medical wisdom, not just conventional wisdom, but medical wisdom and experience that can help them navigate some of these more challenging areas. Loretta says, have any studies connected gluten intolerance or sensitivity to scoliosis? Yes, actually, there have been some studies that have connected the two, but this is generally more advanced or more aggressive forms of scoliosis, and not some of your milder forms like scoliosis in adulthood, where you have, you know, like a 10, 15 degree levo or dextroscoliosis of the thoracic spine or something like that. We're talking about more aggressive forms of scoliosis. And that has to do a lot with malnutrition in the womb, when the neural tube defects can actually contribute to malformation of the spine and other things. Let's see here. 72-year-old diagnosed with celiac disease 8 years ago. I went gluten-free but still have commercial gluten-free breads, etc. I've had 3 or 4 gastroscopies, and the last one showed my villi back to normal. But since I have been put on thyroxine for Hashimoto's, and a month after having my second COVID vaccine, I have had terrible pain in my wrists, fingers, and bunions. Doctor's doing blood tests to find out more. He said my normal blood test showed no inflammation, so it's not RA but osteoarthritis. Not, you know, it could be post-vaccination injury, Judith. I mean, we're seeing a lot of that. Ask your doctor to run a test called your D-dimer. If your D-dimer is high, this is a major problem. It's one of the ways we know that the vaccine actually has caused an inflammation issue. We also know that spike proteins can cause or trigger autoimmune responses without traditional inflammatory tests coming back positive. So it's very possible that you had an injury to that. I wouldn't dismiss that as being a part of that equation. The other thing would be, if you're following a traditional gluten-free diet and not a true gluten-free diet, you know, I understand that autoimmune disease can jump, it moves. The average person that has a celiac diagnosis will go on to develop up to 7 autoimmune diseases in their lifetime if they don't get their diet under better control and their lifestyle under better control. And we know that statistically from research. So it could be that Hashimoto's is just an evolution of your lack of complete diet change in a grain-free manner. That is another possibility. Deborah says, I use almond milk in my coffee. It has gelling gum and locust bean gum, both of which I looked up, but I couldn't come to a conclusion. Locust bean gum is also carob, right? Which is a very difficult to digest gum. And so for some people can be problematic, not for everyone. But we test probably, I'm guesstimating here, probably somewhere around 10% of the people that come to me in my clinic we test are actually allergic or sensitive to locust bean gum. So it's quite a common reaction that we do see. So whether or not you are, I don't know, but that would just be something. If you're using it on a daily basis and you're still struggling, you might consider finding a different almond milk or making your own. Let's see here. I'm celiac, and this is confirmed by a genetic test, which a friendly neurologist pushed for after a lifetime of fighting to survive many of the support in it. Do you think that the two things are related? I'm not sure I understand your question. So you're celiac, and this was confirmed by a genetic test. After a lifetime of fighting to survive, many of the support in it. I don't maybe I'm missing something there. Do you think that the two things are related? Maybe there's a typo in there. Maybe re-ask your question, Val, and I can get to it. Is genetic testing definitive? Is there a chance it could give a false positive? The genetic testing is 99.99 infinity% accurate. So the only time we'd see a false positive would be potentially a mix-up of samples where your sample might be mixed up with somebody else's who was negative, but no, not likely at all that you're going to get a false positive. See, Wendy says, I've had a full thyroidectomy and papillary thyroid carcinoma last year, just after a 60th birthday. Well, happy birthday. After being in remission for 22 years. So I now realize that I have to go completely gluten-free. Let's see, let's get to the question part. Oh, here we go. So can you recommend a safe thyroid medicine without gluten and lactose? There are a couple that I can recommend that you should ask your doctor about. One of them is Deficient, which generally does not. Last time I read the hidden ingredients on Deficient, it did not. Another one is WP, or NP thyroid, which is oftentimes there are shortages, so people have a hard time fulfilling their prescription, kind of like ivermectin right now. So it's a little bit less reliable because there's a lot of shortages that happen. The third option would be compounding, having a compounding pharmacy fill the prescription for you, and that way they can compound it without all the fillers because it's the fillers that contain the corn and the dairy. It's not the actual medicine itself, and so those are your best options. Is the DNA testing available for third parties? Yes, it's available for third parties. If you have like a child that you want to get it done for, you just have to send us their information and your information so we know who to properly send the result back to. Is it possible to do genetic testing if you live in Europe? Yes. Don't call. Email glutenology@gmail.com and ask for Jessica, or mention Jessica. She's handling international shipping. Most of the places we can ship to. There are a few we can't, but most we can, and that's where she can give you a better definitive answer. But if you're trying to get genetic testing done internationally, yes, we can do it. We just have to confirm your address and confirm that we can get it where you live. Let's see, Julie. Hi, naturopath, final year naturopath student here. Awesome. Currently in Melbourne, Australia. I've really enjoyed your webinar so far, and I've noticed that there seems to be a lot of correlations with the implication of glyphosate. Do you have any thoughts on what proportion of the condition, symptoms, implications we can attribute to glyphosate and which to gluten? Yeah, equal. I mean, what I see is, because I have a lot of people, and I know Stephanie Seneff. We've done interviews with Stephanie. She's very intelligent and very well written and very well read, and understands a lot about the glyphosate issue. That being said, gluten is just as big of an issue as glyphosate. I think it's a 1-2 punch, to be honest with you. I think what happens is there are a lot of people, up to 40% of the population is gluten sensitive, according to research that we've done and others have done. You combine that with glyphosate being sprayed on most grain, and you have two poisons, not one. And so you have what's known in biochemistry as the law of synergism. Anytime you mix two chemicals that are bad for you, the outcomes are unpredictable, and you can get a kind of a heightened impact or a heightened effect. And so I think it's both. I don't think it's just glyphosate, because we can go back in time and we can see, even before glyphosate was available, we can see the trend of gluten sensitivity dramatically increasing before the use of glyphosate. So I think it's both. And so I definitely believe people should look for 100% organic in their diet to avoid the glyphosate exposure. But I want to emphasize, because I've seen this question come up a lot, and thank you for asking, is that so many people say, well, if I do organic sprouted, then I'll be fine. I don't have to worry about it. Or if I go to Europe where they don't use glyphosate, I'll be fine and I don't have to worry about it. And those people, I've just seen people be hospitalized over that attitude. It's the wrong attitude to have if you're gluten sensitive. Now, if you don't know whether you're gluten sensitive or not, it's very possible you may not be, and you are getting glyphosate poisoning. So it is something to consider and a question to ask. One of the things that we routinely do in clinic is we can test people for glyphosate exposure. We can also test them for reactivity to glyphosate. So there are tests that can be done that can help us understand whether or not a person's getting bulk exposure too. And my experience is not all the people that are gluten sensitive that react to gluten do we find high levels of glyphosate in. So I don't think that it's just glyphosate. As a matter of fact, I'm very certain that it's not. And one of these days when I retire, I'll probably write a lot of these things up and publish. I just don't have time these days to do it. Let's see, let's keep going down the left. We'll move to the right too. Even if, let's go down on the right as well. How long does it take to create a leaky gut? Minutes. Depending on the poison, it can take minutes to create a leaky gut. It doesn't take a long time at all. How long does it take to heal a leaky gut? Well, it depends on how much damage you did, right? So I don't think anybody's done any research directly, Joanne, that studied, okay, this person had a leaky gut and it took 2 weeks or it took 4 weeks, and this is definitively how we measured that. There aren't any really great outcome studies that I've ever read that show that. I can just speak from experience. In my experience, because leaky gut is so multifactorial, there's not just one thing that causes it. But once it's there, it can be a challenge because the act of eating in and of itself can perpetuate it. And so this is where sometimes you have to mix fasting strategies with diet change and supplementation to really get a leaky gut to recover. And so it's different for different people. I would be very reluctant to give like definitive timeframes, but as a general rule of thumb, in my experience, it takes anywhere from 2 to 6 months to see leaky gut fully go away if you're hitting all the right notes and you're addressing all the right issues. Hopefully that helps you. Let's see, Donald's asking, how common is it, scroll down on the far right for me, how common is it that inflammation is missed out in a blood test? Yet scans reveal it. How common is it? I can't speak statistically on the commonality of that, not with any great degree of intelligence, and be accurate without just giving you an humble guesstimation. But I can tell you this, inflammatory markers in my experience in the blood are far more accurate than scans. We see a lot of people where their scans are completely normal, but we detect inflammation on some of the more nuanced inflammatory markers. So I would say it's probably more apt that you miss it on the scan and you pick it up in the blood. Can I comment on rice, gluten-free oats, and quinoa as it relates to gluten? I think I've hit that pretty hard. Tracy, I would just encourage you to go back and watch Module 2 or read No Grain, No Pain, because I talk really quite in depth about those things. How important is mindset and ACEs in all of this? Super important. Shinquillo, I mean, I've talked about, if you go back and watch the 7 highly effective habits, one of the things we talk about is mindset, spirituality, and inner peace, right? This is super important. And where I think, when I hear people talk about ACEs, which is basically accumulated childhood trauma, oftentimes I'll see people approach that incorrectly. And let me just be clear. I'm not saying that they don't exist and that they're not problematic, but I sometimes see practitioners put way too much emphasis on what happened to a person in the past and not enough emphasis on what they're capable of doing in the present to make themselves and their lives better. And so what they do when they focus on the past is they put that person's mindset in the past, forever dwelling on what happened and never overcoming it. Now, sometimes I see great practitioners put them in the past to help them overcome what happened to move them into the present. But I just have to be clear that there is a distinction between those two methodologies. And we learned this actually from psychiatry in the 70s and 80s, where a lot of the philosophy was all of your illnesses are caused by past childhood traumas. And so what happens is people would just blame their childhood for everything that was wrong with them, and they wouldn't make any great efforts to improve themselves as humans. And you can't get stuck in the past. People that are stuck in the past don't move into the present and can never have a greater future. And so that's what I think in a nutshell. Again, that doesn't mean that childhood trauma can't play a major role. It certainly can. A lot of people have pretty severe trauma that they haven't dealt with. And it is important to deal with it. It's just also important not to dwell in it and make it a part of your everyday. So that's what I'll briefly say about that. How would you know if you're sensitive to methylcobalamin? So some people take it and it keeps them awake, it makes them jittery, it wires them, or it makes them feel really bad because it spins the methylation wheels internally, the chemical wheels of detoxification. Some people aren't quite ready for methylcobalamin, so sometimes it's better to start on hydroxycobalamin because the body can tolerate that version of B12 much better. Somebody says, Chucho says, I'm bummed. Every time I try to sign up for the modules, it's unsuccessful. Reach out to Glutenology at Gmail, Chucho, and let them help you. Let them walk you through and help you get that set up. What's my opinion of A2 milk for a person with ulcerative colitis? Don't recommend any dairy for ulcerative colitis. I've just seen it. I've never seen a case of ulcerative colitis, no matter what kind of milk they were drinking, where milk was the solution. Now, I have seen cases of inflammatory bowel and ulcerative colitis where fermented dairy, fermented A2 dairy was helpful because of the bacterial counts, but not the milk without the probiotic. Can going gluten-free help improve my T level? If by T level you mean testosterone, yes it can. And if by T level you mean T cells, yes it can, both. There's research on both for testosterone being affected as a result of gluten in men, and also on T cell counts being affected and impacted by gluten. Melanie says, I'm a health coach living in Guatemala and interested in your Gluten-Free Society certification. Can I apply for that as a health coach? And is it possible to do it through the online? Yes, it is. Reach out to Jessica at Glutenology. She's my liaison for that course. How does butyrate compare to exogenous ketones? Well, it's different in the sense that butyrate is more designed, it's not a ketone per se. What butyrate is it's a short-chain fatty acid that's designed to fuel the actual colon cells. Your colon cells don't use glucose to produce energy, they use butyrate to produce energy. And so if you're low in butyrate and chronically your colon is inflamed and chronically your colon won't repair, this is a very common thing. And if people come to me in my clinic, we actually measure their butyrate levels to make sure that they're adequate, and that's why we use butyrate supplementally to support a return to good health in the colon. So, but I wouldn't compare it at all to exogenous ketones because it's completely different in that regard. What about hand eczema? What about it? Hand eczema is an autoimmune condition. So if you follow, the logic that I've taught over this past week, the autoimmune disease has 4 predominant triggers that you can address. It has a food trigger, it has a chemical trigger, it has a nutritional deficit trigger, and it has a microbial trigger. And if your doctor has measured those 4 categorical triggers of autoimmunity and ascertained what they are and given you kind of a blueprint to follow based on your outcomes, then eczema can be a thing of the past. It's one of the easiest things in the world to treat without steroids, but most doctors just want to throw steroids at it. So eczema, not a super hard thing to get rid of with diet change. Any suggestions for someone suffering from MS? Yeah, follow No Grain, No Pain immediately. Get on the diet protocol and stay on it. Especially if it's rapidly developing. MS can be, I've seen cases, look, I've had patients in the past with MS get out of their wheelchair and walk again. So this is a friend of mine, Dr. Terry Walls, who's doing research on MS. And if you ever heard of the Walls protocol, she got out of her wheelchair and started riding bikes again. She basically cured her MS. So it's very important with MS to get on it as quickly as possible, because the longer you have neurological damage associated with diet, the wrong diet and the wrong chemical exposures, etc., the more aggressive it becomes and the harder it is to make a full comeback. So the quicker you can catch it, the better. Can you have celiac disease if your gliadin numbers are normal but transglutaminase 2 is high and leaky gut is confirmed as well as intestinal ulcers? Yes, you sure can, Nicole. You absolutely can. Do unborn babies get gluten from the mother before birth if she eats gluten? No studies on that, but what we do know is that babies that are born get gluten from breast milk if they're gluten sensitive and mom is eating gluten. It would go to say, in my opinion, but not, and I can't validate this with research, to say that if a woman was eating gluten and the child was gluten sensitive in the womb, that the inflammation could could potentially penetrate through. I mean, we see a lot of let's say, intrauterine damage with lifestyle choices and lifestyle behaviors. We have examples where drugs can do things, where alcohol can do things, where certain medications can do things to babies in the womb. So I wouldn't suspect that gluten would be any different, but I just haven't seen any research that supports that. Is there a blood test for fibromyalgia? No, there's not. Fibromyalgia is a subjective diagnosis. And what do I mean by that? That means that if you have a set of subjective criteria that match your symptoms, then you get that diagnosis. There's no definitive objective criteria for a doctor to make that. The most objective criteria is pain points, tender points in different regions of the body. And that's really, in my opinion, not a super objective criteria to base an entire diagnosis on. So fibromyalgia, in my opinion, is kind of a person that probably has food sensitivities and multiple chemical sensitivities, and their doctor gave up trying to figure out what was wrong with them, so they labeled them as fibromyalgic. That's generally the case that I see, because I've never met a case of fibromyalgia where the person was willing to change their diet and lifestyle. They couldn't get better, and not in 21 years of practice. It's one of those easy things to overcome. I know it may sound shocking if you've been struggling for years with that condition, but generally it has a root cause. It has a root origin. It's just most people don't know it, and their doctors don't know it, so they just try to give it a name and then put some medicines on top of that name to patch it up and send you on your way. It's the wrong approach. Is there a gluten-free beer? Asking for a friend. I like that. Mary June says, no, there's not a gluten-free beer that I'm aware of. There are beers that claim to be gluten-free that are made from sorghum, but sorghum technically is not gluten-free. It just is gliadin-free. So again, not really truly a gluten-free beer. The closest thing you'll find to a gluten-free beer would be like bubbly or cider, like a hard cider, some of the hard ciders and some of the new seltzer waters that are coming out. But you got to be careful with some of those because they use corn derivatives in them. Not all of them, but many of them. So you got to find a brand that doesn't. Let's see. Is the bread in Europe less harmful? No, not if you're gluten sensitive. The bread in Europe doesn't have less gluten in it. Now, is the bread in Europe potentially have less glyphosate? In some countries, yes, but not in all. In some, yes, but not in all. I think it's one of those things that happens to people when they go on vacation. Is the romanticism of being on vacation and the joy that comes with that. Creates dopamine and creates natural morphine-like compounds that make you feel good. And I think you feel better when you're on vacation. And I think a lot of people confuse the fact that they're feeling better because they're not, doing something that they don't want to do, and they're doing something that they've been planning for and really enjoying it. That I think that the chemicals that are produced as a result of that joy make them feel better, and they construe that as I could eat over there and not feel as bad, but when I got home I felt worse. No, I've seen it too many times where it anyway, I think you guys get my point. Is Sjogren's syndrome caused by gluten? It can be. I've seen cases of Sjogren's go into remission as a result of gluten-free diets. How can I get this resolved? You could change your diet possibly. I tried a change in diet, but my mouth, teeth, and eyesight are being severely damaged. So you got to work with somebody, Nancy. This isn't a DIY type of event where if you've got severe enough Sjogren's, you close your eyes and it feels like sandpaper grinding against your lens. It's not a good thing, and it can affect you long term. So you got to work with somebody who knows what the heck they're doing as it relates to autoimmune recovery. And unfortunately, the training for autoimmunity in medical school, or any school for that matter, is really non-existent. It's such an esoteric world of medicine. Most training is throw medicine at it. You got to look for triggers. If you already eat grain-free because you react to grains, what would you benefit by doing genetic testing? Nothing, not really, other than you might benefit by having the peace of mind knowing that you're doing the right thing. You might benefit if you have children who you suspect may also benefit from going on the diet, and if you have enough gene markers, that transfers to your children, and so you can change their diets as well. And your parents might benefit because if your gene markers are positive, you inherited them from your parents. But directly to yourself, would you benefit directly? Not if you plan on staying grain-free for the rest of your life. There's no really further benefit from testing. So Victoria says, I've gone grain-free for 2 years, suffering from diarrhea, take enzymes and ultra acid. What am I doing wrong? You're probably missing huge chunks of elements, Victoria. I mean, that's the best thing I can tell you. I'd say get with a functional doc if you don't have one. You're all more than welcome to call my office. You might have to wait to get in, but we do see people from a distance, so it's an option if you're just beyond your wits' end and you can't find somebody good on the ground locally. Is there a gluten in toothpaste? There can be. Not all toothpaste contain gluten, but they can, and that's where you have to read your ingredients. So, hi, Dr. Osborne. Any idea if gluten damage to the gut may cause a severe salt deficiency? Not so much damage to the gut causing a salt deficiency in my experience, but damage to the adrenal glands might cause a problem with your water regulation, your water balance, which can, effectively lead to salt deficiency. If you're eating things that, like vitamin D, if you're doing things that thin the blood and it makes you tired, that's kind of an esoteric thing because, omega-3 doesn't thin the blood. That's a misnomer. It doesn't really thin the blood. It actually, it normalizes the blood viscosity. So people that have thick blood, their blood gets thinner when they use omega-3, but not because omega-3 thins the blood, but because they're deficient in an essential nutrient that's job is to help keep the blood viscosity healthy. And D3 doesn't necessarily thin the blood, and silica vinegar doesn't necessarily thin the blood. So I think there may be some other things that are going on there that need a little bit more detail. Is it possible to regain sense of smell and taste? Of course. Now, if you're struggling with a coronavirus and you're trying to regain from post-coronavirus, one of the best 1-2 punches for that is zinc and quercetin combined. Quercetin's an ionophore that pushes zinc into your cell, and zinc is responsible for taste and smell. It's a nutrient that is very critical for your taste and smell. So, but combining those two together, a lot of people take zinc, but the zinc doesn't have access to get into the cell. Quercetin helps that happen. Can lymphoma and stomach cancer be caused by undiagnosed celiac, and can the diet help to get better? Yeah, lymphoma is one of the cancers. Actually, I'm getting ready to go to Truth About Cancer's live symposium. So any of you that are going there, maybe we can meet in person. It'd be great. Come say hi to me. But I'm going to be talking about gluten-related cancers at the TTAC event coming up in Nashville at the Grand Opry ballroom there. So lymphoma is definitely, stomach cancer is definitely one that can be caused by gluten as well. I've had problems with bread the last few. When I eat bread, my throat swells. I've had several tests done, but my allergists say they all came back negative, but I know I have a sensitivity. What do I do now? Virginia, get genetically tested and confirm it. But listen to your body first and foremost. If your throat is swelling when you eat a food, quit eating that food. It's the number one cardinal rule of nutrition is your body's right. Listen to it. Pay attention to what it tells you. Most people ignore it. They take a Tums, they take a Rolaids, they take pain medicine or whatever, and ignore what their body's trying to say to them. And that goes for doctors too, and that includes me. If your body feels better when you do something, even though a doctor's telling you to do something differently, unless they have some really, really great justification for why they're telling you that, you're right, not them. Your body's very intelligent. Why is gluten unhealthy for the gallbladder? Because it damages the liver. Gluten's a cause of cholecystitis, which is gallbladder inflammation. And so it's bad because it can damage and inflame the liver and the gallbladder. Let's see, 25-year emergency food is not gluten-free. Isn't that a topic of discussion right now? So if I have to use it, is there something I can do or take to alleviate eating this food? Not really. I wouldn't eat it. That stuff is garbage, Christina. Get a different plan. That's what I would encourage you to do. Now, my plan, my 25-year emergency food, first of all, it may last 25 years, but I wouldn't necessarily think I would want to trust it over 25 years. But look, common sense advice here, if you're trying to stock up for the emergency times, right? Stock up on canned goods. They have generally, even though they only have a 2-year shelf life, they actually have a 10-year shelf life. And so stock up on some of the things you can get organically. Some of my favorite organic green beans, organic peas, again, high calorie foods. Nut butters, so like if you're not allergic to nuts, nut butters are high calorie, high fat. They last several years, shelf life, especially if you keep them in a dark, cool place. Canned meats, if you're not a vegetarian, canned meats are high fat, especially the fatty fish. You can get them canned. You know, those are high calorie, high protein, because if the proverbial hits the fan and you need emergency rations, you certainly don't want to be eating that anemic, weak, toxic food to try to navigate a chaotic world, right? So you need to have a different strategy for your emergency rations, and I would just encourage you to delve into canned goods or do some of your own home canning with mason jars, because we've got stuff in our pantry that's canned over 10 years ago and still tastes great. Canned fish, canned meats, canned vegetables. You can can potatoes. You can can all kinds of things if you have a pressure cooker and canning material. So it just takes a little time, effort, and research to get it done right. But don't recommend those highly caustic, highly toxic emergency rations that people are selling online. Just not good for you. And again, if you ever needed it, you actually need to be nourished. You don't want to walk around like a zombie in the zombie apocalypse because the food you're eating is poisoning you. Can gluten damage your digestive system and cause weak teeth? It absolutely can. There are a number of studies that show enamel defects as a result of gluten exposure. Let's see. Hemp seeds. Do hemp seeds have gluten? No, they don't. I gave up gluten but still have psoriasis. What can I do? Work with a functional provider who understands autoimmunity and autoimmune recovery. Because psoriasis it can get bad. I mean, if it's skin psoriasis, but the kind of the transition of psoriasis, it can go from kind of a skin manifestation to a joint manifestation. Psoriatic arthritis can cripple people, and it can fuse your spine. You don't want to let it progress. So this is not something you want to play around with. Scleroderma is caused by ? David wants to know. Lots of things. Scleroderma, just like any other form of autoimmunity, has triggers. And I've seen cases of scleroderma where gluten was one of the major triggers. I've seen people with scleroderma do dramatically better at changing their diet. So there's a big scleroderma community. And unfortunately, the doctors in that community are just leading people down the path toward drugs and immune suppression. There's not a lot of hope in that path. So if you're struggling with scleroderma, you need to come down the path of diet change and lifestyle change, and potentially analytical laboratory to help you identify those different fundamental triggers. Is levothyroxine safe for thyroid prescription? The problem with levothyroxine, if you're gluten sensitive, is it has corn in it. And so can you get levothyroxine compounded? You can. You have to ask your prescribing doctor, though, to write you a compounded prescription for it. I've recently done a food sensitivity dry blood spot test. Yeah, I don't recommend those dry blood spot tests. They're measuring antibody levels that can be very misleading. So I don't really even have a comment on that. Those tests are inaccurate and, in my opinion, overly restrictive. Let's see, Michael's asking, how do you get a consult? Just reach out to my office. We can pop the number up for you, but it's 281-240-2229 if you want to just reach out and talk to one of our client care advocates. Would everyone benefit being gluten-free based upon Dr. Alicio Fasano? I assume you mean Alicio Fasano and not Alisano, Catherine. Not necessarily. Again, I don't think that we have the scientific validity or evidence to say that everybody needs to go gluten-free with 100% certainty. That's not to say that everybody going on a gluten-free diet might not have some benefits. I think where a lot of people benefit on a grain-free, gluten-free diet, even if they're not gluten sensitive, or if it's not pesticide poisoning, is they benefit because their lifestyle has been carbohydrate toxic for so long. So the large quantity or volume of carbohydrates in the foods that they're eating are trending them toward inflammation and blood viscosity increase and diabetes and other health problems. And so they may benefit in that way, but not necessarily, again, I don't want to make the claim that all people are gluten sensitive. I just don't think we can scientifically make that claim. Yeah, so another question about genetic testing. If I've already been doing a gluten-free diet, will genetic testing be accurate? Of course it will be, because your genes don't change. Remember, your genes don't change. The expression of your genes change, but the actual genes themselves don't change. What you have is what you have. Let's see. Refractory, let's see, Alexandra. I have refractory celiac, and my specialist put me on budesonide, but nothing changed. Now he put me on apoxithioprin, which I'm not very keen on taking, as there are lots of side effects. You're not kidding. Is there something else I can do instead of taking medications? Yeah, Alexandra, follow everything I've been teaching. If you didn't get an opportunity to watch the entire class, go back. You can still purchase it. It's not too late. I think there's still some discounts for those of you who want to own the class. But if you're struggling and you want kind of guidance to intelligent conversations you can have with your doctor, because budesonide is an anti-inflammatory, it's not going to do anything for your disease. If you're refractory, it's because what you're doing is wrong. And the research shows, and my research shows this too, but my colleagues' research shows that, if 5 years of gluten-free diets show persistent inflammatory damage to the intestine despite your gluten-free diet. My point in saying that is the GI doctors that recommend a gluten-free diet for celiacs recommend a gluten-free diet, but they don't go on to explain what that really should look like or what that really should mean. And so most people follow a wheat, barley, and rye-free diet, but then they go out and buy all the processed corn and processed rice, junk food, and then they get labeled as refractory. And the next step is immunosuppression. And it's a terrible idea to suppress your immune system indefinitely when you can just change your diet and no longer be refractory. So you need better guidance, is my point. It's frustrating. I know it's got to be frustrating for you, because it's infinitely frustrating for me to see so many sick people coming into my office on a weekly basis who've been just given horrible advice. And nobody's holding any of these other doctors accountable for the terrible advice that they're giving. And these patients are just getting sicker and sicker. Is non-GMO popcorn, organic popcorn, off limits? Yeah, if you're gluten sensitive, it's off limits. Again, I think I've said this enough times, so I'm not even going to read any more questions that are asking me whether or not grain is okay to eat. If at this point in this class, in this education, if you don't understand that, it's because you haven't watched the class yet. So go back and watch the class. I really want to encourage you to do that, because I don't want you to make that mistake of going and just saying, hey, I eat organic popcorn and therefore it's okay. Are potatoes all kinds safe to eat on a gluten-free diet? Yeah, they can be, unless you're allergic to them. Now, some potatoes can be problematic for some people because of the carbohydrate load, and they have blood sugar abnormalities and problems also along with gluten sensitivity. So, but as a general rule, potatoes are gluten-free. All right. I want to just say too, thank you so many of you for putting in your great feedback on the class. That really, you have no idea. We've worked countless hours, long nights. I've worked 21 years to build this, and to know that it's helping and serving you in a high level, at a high level, is just very. It's just very heartwarming for me, and it helps makes me feel like the time away from my family and the efforts that I put into this and the sacrifice that I put into this has been well worth it if it's helped change your life or save your life. So thank you for that feedback. Let's see. If I am celiac and am more susceptible to thyroid disease, cancer, and to gallstones, also can the fact that I am sensitive to tapioca be related to my gluten in any way? Tapioca and gluten, there's not a correlation really between those two, not a really great correlation, although tapioca is highly glycemic and can feed yeast. So if you have pre-existing yeast, eating a lot of tapioca products will feed that yeast. And remember, yeast, as we talked about in Module 8, produces proteins that mimic gluten that can trigger what feels like a gluten sensitivity. So this is where a lot of times people that eat tapioca don't feel well because they have an underlying candida issue. So that is definitely a correlation that we see. So this is, Anna's asking, is there anything else I can do to speed up recovery? She's referring to Graves' disease, but I'll just say this refers to any form of autoimmunity. If you are trying to speed up recovery, the 7 habits, that 7 habits video where I talk about the 7 different things that you should be focused on in your health aside from diet change, is something I would encourage you to go back and watch, and just make a list of those 7 and write them down in the fridge, put them on your nightstand, and ask yourself every day, am I doing my part? Am I doing my part? Because it's where I see people, their recovery is slowed or where their recovery is pushed backward, it's when they're not doing their part. And so just keep it at top of mind. Ask yourself the question every day. Ask yourself, how can I improve every day? Knowing that you're not going to be perfect through that journey, but how can you improve every day? How can you make meaningful, impactful changes every day? Some of these questions, I'm not reading them, not because they're not great questions, but because they're just too long, and it's too much for this forum. I would have to go into a 3-hour dissertation on some topics, and we just don't have that kind of time. So if I don't get to your question, it's not because I didn't want to. So Carol's asking, does the new definition of gluten mean that those of us adhering to the gluten-free diet can no longer eat fresh whole grain, U.S.-grown organic brown rice or anything made from it? I don't recommend it. It's not the new definition. It's the definition that always was, that was never discussed. It was the elephant in the room. It was the lack of knowledge in science that most gastroenterologists have when they make the diagnosis of celiac disease or non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So it was the lost conversation that never occurred in the doctor's office or the nutritional office. So it's not a new definition, and it's not even my definition. I'm just the one that brought the research together from all these great researchers who did wonderful work to make this class possible, to make this culmination of information possible. And I took my clinical experience, and after applying it for decades, and put it all together for you. So it's not, again, it's not the new definition, it's the old definition being brought to new light. And so what that means is you shouldn't eat grain, if we really want to simplify it. That's why the book's name is No Grain, No Pain, not No Gluten, No Pain. Any suggestions for birdshot uveitis? I've been gluten-free for over 1.5 years and feel great other than my eyes. So you're missing something, Galileo. You're missing something big. There's a trigger that you're missing, or the uveitis would clear up. So you've got to get more granular in that regard. And that probably means getting a good functional practitioner and getting some testing done to find out what you're missing. Mark asks, have you ever seen a case of ALS be cured? No, I haven't. That's one of the few cases of illnesses that, I lost my stepfather to ALS. This is before I was a doctor, before I was in graduate school. And I've had good friends develop ALS, and it's just been one of those that has eluded us. It's very, very challenging. I think the reason why is that its onset, by the time the symptoms set in, the disease damage has been so progressed for so many decades that it's a match against time, and the disease, once it sets in, for many can get very progressive very quickly. I think the cure for ALS, honestly, is in the prevention, and I think the prevention is in the identification, and it's in our social dogmatic belief today that food doesn't matter, that medicine can cure things, that social integration and love are not as important in today's world. Like these are like artificial belief systems that are pervasive in our society today. And I think the cure for most disease, if not all disease, minus the genetic diseases that people are born with, really has to do with the prevention early on, and recognizing that food is of the utmost important aspect. It should be cherished. Where your food comes from should be cherished. Those animals, if you're eating them, should have wonderful lives up to the time where they give theirs for yours. The crops that you're growing, or the food that you're growing, should not be sprayed with poisons, and the ground shouldn't be sprayed with poisons, and you shouldn't overgrow and monocrop. I think the way we do things is so ass backwards, excuse my language, that it's lended towards a normality of illness in this world, and ALS is one of those. In my experience, it's super challenging. And again, I think it's because the neurological damage, it's so silent for so long until it's not, and then it turns on very, very quickly. And by the time you catch it, it's a lot like Alzheimer's or dementia in that way. If you catch dementia when somebody's mind is already gone, you're not bringing them back from that, no matter how you change their diet. But if you catch it early, then you prevent it from coming into fruition. And I think ALS fits in that category. How much ubiquinol or CoQ10 is safe? It depends. Depends on who you are, your history, depends on a lot of different things, but it's generally safe to take anywhere from 1 to 300 milligrams outside of the supervision, meaning not being under the supervision of a doctor. Can you recommend naltrexone for residual RA pain? You can. Naltrexone can be effective. Low dose naltrexone can be effective, but the question is it necessary? If you have residual RA pain, why is that? And that's the deeper question I would ask. Naltrexone is although it can be an effective medicine, it's a medicine of very last resort, in my opinion, for somebody where we've done everything we know possible to do. We've absolutely exhausted all knowledge and all actions, and we still have a pre-existing issue that won't quite clear. Then LDN, low-dose naltrexone, can be another step that you can take. Do I recommend melatonin on a gluten-free diet? It's gluten-free. I don't not recommend it, but you make melatonin is free. Go outside. You make it every day with your optic nerve. So Rebecca says, I'm non-celiac gluten sensitive. Just read or just started reading No Grain, No Pain. What other resources are available? Go to glutenfreesociety.org. I'm biased here, but it's the #1 resource in the world for all things gluten, food allergy related. So connect with that site, get on their newsletter, and get educated. So a question about, is it worth getting genetic testing if you shouldn't eat grains anyway, even if organic, because of the mold contamination and heavy metal uptake from soil? It's a question only you can answer. Is it worth you spending the money that it costs to have that knowledge? That's really ultimately what it boils down to. If in your heart and mind you feel like that cost is justified, then yeah, it's worth it. But if you're already grain-free and you have no intentions of eating grain ever again, and you know that why you're doing that and you're comfortable with that, then there's really, in my opinion, not a benefit other than a psychological benefit. So question about supplements. In the Masterclass, you recommended multi-nutrients, ultrabiotic defense, Omega Max, and Gluten Shield. Any point taking them before repairing my leaky gut? Any problem? No problem at all. You take them because they're core essential nutrients that support healing, right? So even if you have an existing leaky gut, you're taking these things to support your healing process. Can gluten cause receding gum lines? Yeah, it can, absolutely. So I like this comment. Srini says, pharma and big hospitals could be closed if all doctors were this honest and skillful. Look, that's our goal, right? How do we get this information out there? How do we get other doctors on board with this? How do we change the paradigm of the last 60, 70 years of failed medicine and failed pharmacology model? How do we change that? We demand better. How do you change it? When you go to your doctor, if they give you pomp and circumstance and they try to fluff you with drugs that you don't believe in, then you let them know that they're practicing in a manner that's inconsistent with good health. You let them know. You demand better. And the funny thing, one of the great things about America, hopefully this won't change, is that you speak with your dollar. At the end of the day, you speak with your dollar. What gets a doctor to rethink the paradigm? Really only two things: bankruptcy and fear. Bankruptcy, meaning he's going to go out of business because the model of care he's giving the headlight has been shown upon it as being fraudulent and not effective. And he has to change, or he has to sink or swim. So he has to change or he has to retire, right? And then fear. The fear would be that he fears the loss of his mortal soul to doing things voluntarily the wrong way and effectively hurting people once he's enlightened. Many doctors, once they're enlightened, they can't go back because that enlightened mindset doesn't allow them to continue to practice in the same way. So how do we get it to change? We demand better. We demand more. We ask them for more. We ask them to learn more. We ask them to grow with us and to not gaslight us when we have symptoms and we have problems. Those types of doctors, shut them down by not paying them. Don't go to them. Don't visit them. Don't give them your copay, your insurance. Tell other people that they shouldn't go to them as well, right? Word of mouth, right? This conversation that we're having today, 20 years ago when I first got into really in-depth nutrition, this conversation was a whisper. This gluten conversation really was a whisper. I mean, you could hear it. People were whispering in corners. You would hear small groups of people at the party talking about it, but nobody really knew what it was, and those people were kind of odd and strange. It was just a whisper in the room. Today, gluten-free is a roar. It's a roar that's heard across the world, and you know that. You're here in this class today, and there's not one of you that haven't heard that term, and there's not a grocery store in the United States of America that doesn't have a gluten-free food, albeit it's junk food. They know about that word because it's become a roar. And where are we at today? We're today on the same precipice we were 20 years ago with gluten as it relates to medicine. Medicine's failing and it's becoming more and more obvious, and that's why the pushback and the control has been so ferocious during this time. It's a reflexive response. It's like if you ever watched an animal die, I have a farm, so we unfortunately, it's part of farm life. You sometimes see animals die, but a lot of times they're thrashing in their death throes, right? And so when something is in its death throw, it thrashes violently, uncontrollably. And I think that's what we're seeing is the reflexive thrashing and violent, uncontrollable movements of a system that's completely failing, and it's doing everything that it can to hold on to power and to keep people in the dark through censorship and through lack of science and controlling of the information and controlling of this conversation. But remember, they can't stop the idea, and they can't stop the fact that this conversation is being held by every person who ever struggles with chronic disease. Eventually they get frustrated and they have this corner conversation with somebody, and that whisper becomes a conversation, and that conversation becomes a crowd, and that crowd becomes a large gathering, and it eventually becomes a movement, and that movement becomes a roar. And that's what we're trying to create. So when you hear me say that we're trying to save 100 million lives, we're trying to create that roar that demands better care, that demands better knowledge, that demands better education of the doctors who we put our trust and faith in, and that we don't just get dismissed and psychologically stamped with the crazy card because somebody is not patient enough or not willing enough to learn, or is too dogmatic in their own belief system that they're no longer learning at all. They're just filling the script pad. We can change that. We can all change that together, but we have to do it together. And so that's why we're having this masterclass, and that's why I invite you back every Monday night to participate in the whisper that becomes the roar that's heard around the world. And so again, I want to thank you all for tuning in tonight. We've run over. I ran over on purpose. I wanted to take care of as many of these questions as we could. I think we did a decent job of doing that. And I want to invite all of you back next week. I do this every Monday night, so for those of you who are new and are just finding me, make sure you go sign up at glutenfreesociety.org for our newsletter so that you can get email reminders of our live Q&A sessions, again, right here every Monday night at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. I'm here for you, and I only expect one thing out of you. Actually, I expect two things out. Actually, I expect three things out of you now that I'm thinking about it. I expect your attendance, your attentive ear. I expect you to apply the knowledge, because knowledge without application is wasted information. And I expect you to share, because the way this becomes a roar is we reach other people that need the information. We convert people who are on the fence, who don't know any better, who are struggling in their health because they've been doing it wrong and they don't know another way. We take those people and we let them know this is the power that they can tap into that can change their life, that can change their outcome and save their life, so that we can reach those 100 million people and make major impact in the world together. So this is Dr. Osborne wishing you excellent health and a wonderful week. I will see you next Monday night for another episode of Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. Take care. Hey, don't forget to tune in next week, same time, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, for another Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain show. Bring all your toughest health questions to me. I look forward to answering them. And before you leave today, make sure you hit subscribe. And once you do, click that bell. That bell is going to allow us to remind you right before we go live, but it's also going to allow us to remind you when we come out with other video content all week long. We've got lots of episodes coming your way all week long, and I don't want you to miss anything. So again, subscribe, hit that bell so that you can get notified when we have that new information put up for you. Thanks so much, and I'm wishing you excellent health. Have a great week. We'll see you next Monday night.